Good evening and welcome. It's a distinct honor to get to welcome you to a great celebration tonight. It is Northern Virginia Transportation Commission's 60th anniversary. There's an applause right there. So 6 decades, NVTC has been at the heart of enhancing and building our region's public transportation network. So happy to celebrate. We have one birthday in the room, John Milliken. Everybody clap for him. Happy birthday. Since the creation in 1964, NVTC has been dedicated to improving mobility. And if you think of Northern Virginia, as you think back through the years, improving mobility for Northern Virginia and for the region has been a critical challenge and an important piece of work. Planning the metro rail system, founding BRE, and we just talked about that with Sharon Bulova, developing the commuter choice program and new transit technologies. We led the region, and if you think about, there is supporting local economies, moving people quickly and efficiently to make their lives better, and reducing the environmental footprint. All three of those are just central to people's quality of life. So thrilled to welcome you. They're huge accomplishments, and it's a testament to the hard work of so many of you who've been commissioners, to the current staff, and to all of you who keep working in this space. Happy to have you join us. We have a special program planned, a video that I know you're going to like. I'd like to turn it over to our fantastic Executive Director, Kaine. Kate?
Thank you, Chair DeFerenti. It is so wonderful to see everybody here. And thank you, Chair DeFerenti, for your leadership in our 60th year. So it truly is an important milestone and celebration. 1964, we'll get a little bit about this in our wonderful documentary come up, was really a big year for transportation. President Johnson actually signed the Urban Mass Transit Act, which started this whole big thing and launching a new era of public transit in the country. And NVTC was part of that energy, where our region and the Commonwealth of Virginia came together to say, we need to think regionally. And at that time, it was about thinking about rapid transit. And so that way, by coming together as a region, we were really going to do something pretty big. And the way for us to do that was going to be bringing our cities and counties together. So that really was the foundation of NVTC. We're going to hear a lot more about that. And so for all those 60 years, NVTC has been at the table for many of the big public transit achievements in our region. And so the dedication of so many people here in this room has made it possible for Virginia to be really the cornerstone of our region's robust transportation network. So really that is why we're here to celebrate this evening. So we do have a fabulous program for you. Thanks to so many current and former commissioners and other voices in NVTC's history, we have a special documentary. And the one thing I'm incredibly proud of, it is 100% prepared by NVTC staff and our DRPT intern program. And so just go with that lens. Ahead of our film, we do have a short program. We have some special guests, and we're just incredibly honored. We've got Michael Sargent, the Deputy Secretary for Transportation in Virginia. He's going to join us representing Shep Miller, our Secretary. And really, the Commonwealth of Virginia is such a key partner in our ability to be successful with public transit up here in Northern Virginia. And of course, we have the honor of having several congressional guests. One, of course, who's already here. We're so happy to see you, Senator Tim Kaine. And I know we're expecting Congressman Beyer shortly. Oh, and there he is. Well, you just snuck in. That is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. And so it is just absolutely wonderful. There are two other guests we were hoping to have this evening. Congresswoman Wexton sends her regrets. She actually was not able to make it. She was also a commissioner at NVTC. And just this afternoon, I did get a call from Congressman Connolly. He is under the weather, and for any of us who know Congressman Connolly well, he keeps going until he doesn't. So we're going to let him rest so he can get back to a lot of community events that I know he's got going on this weekend. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, our wonderful guests, for being here. I do need to pause. It was so wonderful looking outside and looking at so many of you here. How many current and former commissioners are here with us this evening? So many friends and colleagues and champions of NVTC. It really is an honor for all of you to come out and join And normally we do one of those, introduce everybody important in the room. You are all important. I like that. That was a good shaking of your head. Thank you. This is like the global recognition. Thank you, because all of you have played an incredible, influential role in what we have going on here. And so the other thing that I do get the honor of doing is doing a shout out to the NVTC staff who are here. They're actually all hanging out on those back 2 rows. And so they really are the dream team. And I'd have them wave, but I actually can't see that far away. But I get the honor of doing the special shout out to actually 3 of our employees that have been with NVTC for more than 20 years. And so hopefully, I can't see that far, but hopefully you all can see. So I would love for Scott Colcorth, Talithia Quarles, and Rhonda Gilchrist to stand up and give their recognition. So, and just of note, we're talking 24, 25, and 37 years. So we all know that Rhonda came here when she was 12. So thank you so much. Honestly, the team of NVTC is just absolutely fantastic. So this evening, of course, is a little different than our kind of policy wonk nature of the commission. So many of you have been to our commission meetings. It is a celebration, and in good form. This celebration has been made possible by sponsors. And we've got those sponsors. I know we had a slide up earlier, but they're highlighted here in the back of your program. And it is absolutely fantastic. Our local transit agencies, some architecture and engineering firms, regional partners, and other key players that have really made it possible for us to have those wonderful refreshments, be in here today, and all that. So thank you to our sponsors. So now I'd like to really kick off the program. I'd like to introduce Michael Sargent, the Deputy Secretary of Transportation for the Commonwealth of Virginia. So Michael joined the administration of Governor Glenn Youngkin in January 2022 as the Deputy Secretary for Transportation, working under Secretary Shep Miller, who I know sent his regrets. As so many of you in the room know, our partnership with the Commonwealth makes so much of what we do happen, and the work that you've been doing, and a key partner, especially to dive into funding things out there. We greatly appreciate your leadership. So I'm just going to turn it over to you in one moment, because the one person I also want to recognize is Zach Trogdon, who's our Director of Rail and Public Transit. There he is. Very good. So Zach, thank you for coming down here. So I'm going to turn this over to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Kate. It's an honor to be here and welcome everyone. So many people I'd like to thank, but like Kate said, everyone here is just so integral to transportation, not only in Northern Virginia, but across the Commonwealth. So really pleased to welcome you all on behalf of Governor Youngkin and Secretary Miller. Again, they send their regrets, but they are keenly aware of how important this group and the region more broadly is to everything we're doing down in Richmond. And so I don't think that there's a more appropriate day to celebrate the partnership between the Commonwealth and the region, as today marked the closing of the Commonwealth's acquisition of the Manassas line here in Northern Virginia. So please give DJ Stadler, VPRA, our VPRA board, and all the VPRA staff a huge congratulations. This took so much effort, and it's really going to be an unbelievable deal for the Commonwealth. So DJ and our board, thank you so much for your leadership. And this opportunity would not have been possible without the support of VRE and the region. We thank you wholeheartedly for your commitment. And while the deal is certainly good for VRE and its riders, the Manassas line unlocked a better, cheaper, and faster rail solution all the way down in the New River Valley, saving the Commonwealth about $100 million in doing so. So this really speaks to just the importance of this regional collaboration, both within the region and then between the regions and at the state level. And I'm not sure this collaboration would be possible without this model of regional governance that Virginia wisely embraced 60 years ago. To paraphrase de Tocqueville, the art of association becomes the mother of action. And perhaps there's nowhere that is truer than transportation. where you literally cannot get where you're going without cooperation from people on the other side of that invisible boundary line. In the Commonwealth, and indeed the nation, NVTC is an early leader in this subtle art of association, which recognizes that certain problems are too big for any one locality to address, yet too important to relegate to Richmond 100 miles away. This principle of subsidiarity, as delegating authority over regional transportation needs to a regional entity best positioned to internalize costs and benefits, brings governance both closer to the people and ensures there's real skin in the game. These concepts were apparently completely self-evident 60 years ago, as I asked the Library of Virginia for chronicles of the debate surrounding the creation of NVTC. And they informed me that there were no such records, and that, in fact, the legislation passed unanimously, save one single nay vote in the House, which I have to note for Senator Kaine was cast by a delegate from the city of Richmond. And so in digging into some of these historical documents to understand how Virginia sought to tackle this complex multi-jurisdictional transportation challenge, and yes, that is what I do in my free time sometimes, some of the details aged really well. I was pleased to see that in standing up NVTC, the Commission's first budget in 1966 called for a whopping internal operating budget of $160,000, which is actually not far off from NVTC's administrative budget today when you scale it up for inflation. But I don't believe it afforded NVTC at the time Sundance-style film debuts and champagne toasts. Other details, such as the belief that Metro would be fully self-supported by fares and completely debt-free by 2010, look a little optimistic in retrospect. But it was also fascinating to see that it took nearly a decade and a large cost increase in the construction of Metro before the state stepped in and pledged $35 million in 1972 and began payments in 1973. Which kicked off the ebb and flow of state support to the region for Metro. And that's a structure that's undoubtedly different than our colleagues across the Potomac, as well as in other regions, such as New York and Chicago. And so as we look to the next 60 years, there is a lot of momentum, particularly around our recent progress on rail, the ridership recovery on our regional bus network, and technology's potential to drastically improve urban transportation networks. There is, of course, uncertainty as well, particularly around Metro's finances, cost growth, which has provided some challenges as it's outpaced local revenues, state revenues, and generally the tax base, which will be something that we're all going to have to grapple with in the coming years. So there's much work left to be done, but I'm confident that these 60 years show that NVTC provides a solid foundation, association of regional interests, necessary to bring about the action needed to tackle our toughest transportation challenges. So I want to thank everyone again who has dedicated their time and efforts to this hugely critical transportation governance infrastructure here in Northern Virginia. It's really an honor to be here, and I can't thank you all enough for all you do.
Thank you, Michael. It does take partnerships, and we have been able to make progress in partnerships on one of the key challenges of funding for these years, and we're grateful. More broadly, NVTC's success, as so many in the room have personally experienced over multiple years, requires strong partnerships. We have outstanding partners in our congressional leaders. Two of them are here. I love the description of Jerry Connolly, going, and then relaxed when he needs to get healthy. But we are thrilled to have these two great partners here. And if you think about what we have done recently and are doing, Long Bridge, new electric buses, investments in bus rapid transit, and the key federal money that has kept the Metro system strong and reliable, it is our congressional delegation that we have to have champions, and we have great champions. First, I'd like to introduce Senator Tim Kaine. Come on up, Senator Kaine. I won't go on, but please give him a hand. So, Richmond Mayor to our U.S. Senator, He understands the values and the work we do in Northern Virginia, in addition to Richmond. My favorite recent memory on this topic is at the Silver Line. How many, raise your hand if you were at the Silver Line start? Senator Kaine described dreaming of the Silver Line taking off at the end. So that when you're dreaming about transportation progress, you know you are committed. And he also is clear, not only does he have vision, he has the workhorse skills again and again on issue after issue to make it happen. And if you think back to your administration, making the Silver Line happen was a vision that you put effort into. He was there all along. Please give another warm welcome and thanks to Senator Tim Kaine.
Thanks, man. Hey, thanks so much. Thank you. I want to thank Matt for his kind words and his leadership and his arm twisting to get me here. I can't believe you put a Richmonder on the program of the NVTC 60th, but I'm so honored to have a chance just to share with you. Kate Henley was sharing a funny story that I had forgotten, but it immediately came back to mind. So I'm a Richmond mayor, and I'm running for lieutenant governor. And I have some friends from local government days here in Northern Virginia, Kate Henley, Jim Dyke, and some others. And I think I'm about to have one of my first debates in Northern Virginia. And they're like, what are you going to say about transportation? And I said, well, I'm going to say, look, I'm the Richmond mayor. I got roads, I got public transit, I got an airport, I got rail, and I even have a port, the Port of Richmond. So I know something about transportation. And they both responded, no, you don't. You don't have any idea about transportation. So it was immediately very humbling. The other thing I noticed as when I was running for lieutenant governor, something happened in Northern Virginia that wouldn't happen anywhere else. People would be happy if I was late for a meeting. If I showed up on time for a meeting, they were disappointed because if I was late for a meeting, it was always, see, you didn't understand how bad our traffic needs were in Northern Virginia. They viewed me being late as a teachable moment for the Rube from Richmond. NVTC has played such an important role. The single hardest thing I've worked on in 30 years in public life, I just celebrated 30 years on July 1 from my first city council election. The single hardest project I've worked on in public life was extending the Silver Line to Dulles. What a challenge. I was a lieutenant governor and saw a dusty scale model of it in Jerry Halpin's office in Tyson's. They used the model to store coats on it. What is this? Well, this is this thing that we thought we might do. When I got elected governor, I challenged my Prince William Secretary of Transportation, Pierce Homer. We're going to have this thing under contract, and we're going to have a groundbreaking before I'm done being governor in 4 years. And we did. But I was sued by my legislature over it. Jerry Halpin got mad at me over it and had protesters showing up to protest me because of some design decisions we make. We lost federal funding at a critical moment that was going to unplug the entire project. And I wrote a letter to George W. Bush's Secretary of Transportation, Mary Peters, saying, you shouldn't have pulled our funding. We've done everything you asked. And when I went into her office, the DOT office over near the baseball stadium in D.C., I'll never forget walking in and walking across the room, and she stood up and said, Governor, I apologize to you. You're right, and we're wrong, and we're going to make this happen. I'll never forget. Mary Peters, Frank Wolf, Fairfax officials, John Warner, Jim Moran, a whole lot of people worked so very, very hard. And to be able then to have a third chapter as a senator on getting the financing done to get phase 2 out to Dulles and beyond and show up at that opening. What an amazing project, but it was the work of thousands. You do really important work. Here's the last thing I want to say about why the NVTC is particularly important, and I think Michael's done a good job of pointing out this subsidiarity. We're not going to have all the answers in Richmond, and we're certainly not going to have them in D.C., but there is a feature of Virginia government that I think makes the NVTC particularly important, and it's the one-term governor. When people ask me about the one-term governor, I say, look, it's good for family. It's not necessarily that good for governance because long-term projects take a lot longer than 4 years. And switching out the executive every 4 years can sometimes put important projects in kind of a limbo status. Start this direction, tack back the other way, tack back the other way. No kinds of projects at the state level are as complex and take more time and require more of a long-term vision than transportation projects. They're hard to design. They're hard to cite with local land use issues. They're hard to finance. Very, very difficult. And what the NVTC has done since 1964 is provide, with the representation of members from the localities, a continuity that could continue to focus on projects even as state government was, going this way and going that way. And so I think particularly the way we do state government with a single term makes the NVTC so very critical, and your results are proof of your success. I don't know when it was started 60 years ago, what the Vegas odds would be that we would be here celebrating a 60th birthday, but Godspeed, and I look forward to continuing to be a good partner and progress for important transportation initiatives in Northern Virginia and beyond. Thanks so much.
Thank you to Senator Kaine. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Congressman Beyer, Don Beyer, who is no stranger to NVTC or our jurisdictions. The congressman is my congressman. We have two great champions for public transit. Congressman Beyer, not everybody may know he was on the Commonwealth Transportation Board. Many people will know, but not everybody will know. And then he served as, of course, as lieutenant governor. Now he's been a champion in Congress. For my part, my personal story is right at the end of COVID, or just after the bulk of COVID, he came in and gave this presentation to NVTC that I knew about his work on the Joint Economic Committee, and I knew about so many of his pieces of knowledge on climate, on issue after issue. But the presentation at NVTC on the details of policy was outstanding and humbling, and I thought I should prepare better for meetings, to be honest. But we have a great chance to hear from Congressman Beyer. Give him a hand. Sure.
Thank you, Matt, very much. I always love being the only car dealer in a room with a bunch of transit people. And Tim, I love Tim Kaine, and I hope you read his book, his new book, where he hiked the entire Appalachian Trail in Virginia. He canoed the entire James River in Virginia, and he rode his bike on all of the Skyline Drive, Virginia, Blue Ridge Parkway, the entire length of Virginia. So he told me tonight that he's now going to ride on every mile of transit, an NVTC thing, and edit the book. Be a new book coming out. It'll be very cool. Yeah, I'm a local kid, so every time I get to do transit, I remember riding the bus to Gonzaga every day. The DC Transit, which is owned by O'Roy Chalk, they're the big bus barn at the end of Key Bridge. And whenever we see anybody older than 30 years old, we'd open the window, we'd lean out and yell, "You'll never live to see the Metro." Because we were sure it was never going to happen, ever going to happen. And I'm humbled to be in this room because I was never brave enough to do local office. I couldn't take the stress. But I'm thrilled to be here anyway, and welcome to the 8th Congressional District. I am a local kid, like many of you here, so I remember 1964 very well. My grandmother had a farm on Spring Hill Road in McLean, where we would come all the time. We spent the summer of 1964 there, when my dad was on detail overseas, and we would ride out Spring Hill Road, which was one lane, one step above gravel, to Leesburg Pike, Route 7, make a left-hand turn, and go down to 123, which was then called the famous Tyson's Corner. And it was literally, Kate grew up here. There's 2 lanes in each direction. There was a gas station, a peach market where we buy peaches, and an old ice house where when you killed the cow, you carved it up and left it in the ice house. So that same 1964, Shirley Highway had just opened. There was no metro. There was no beltway. There were no hot lanes. There was no road to Dulles. We would go from Palisades, where I grew up, to my grandmother's farm. It was 1 hour from Chain Bridge all the way out to McLean. And now, one of the number one complaints I get, or questions I get as a member of Congress is, how do you put up with that? How do you put up with how everything is so slow and so glacial paces? And I say, what you have to do is actually step back and look at where we were in 1964 before NVTC and where we are today. Dramatically different. Well, it's a wonderful thing. So you've come a long, long way, baby. And now, one of the best things about NVTC James McGregor Burns defined leadership as vision and agenda. And you still have that rich, robust vision. Happily, Tim and Mark, Jerry, Jennifer, and I, and others have been able to put $729 million to the Long Bridge project, another $850 million to PRIA. We got Kamala came as vice president to cut the ribbon on the new electric school buses in Falls Church, but many more electric buses coming. The charging stations have doubled over the last year across the country, and there'll be many, many more charging stations here. And you see every time there's a ribbon cutting for anything, a rail station, a new rail line, a bus line, a bus rapid transit, whatever, NVTC is there because you're a big, big part of it. And I'm just so very, very grateful for all that. Jerry Connolly took the wonderful initiative to wait in line for an hour and a half to be able to speak on the House floor and do a commemorative resolution. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the first and last paragraph. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Mr. Speaker, I ask my colleagues to join me in commemorating this milestone for the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. NVTC has become a champion for commuters across the region, an advocate for sustainable transit funding, and a leading voice on transportation policy throughout the Commonwealth. So on behalf of all this, Tim knows I almost never will introduce poetry into a political event. But Robert Browning did say, grow old along with me, the best is yet to be. I look forward to the next 60 years.
Great. And this time, I don't have big remarks. I will say, as I've gotten to engage with a few of you and listening to Congressman Beyer, and particularly those last lines, there is a public trust component of this. I'm chair for just 1 year, and I have have the honor of being able to be in the room for some of the discussions. You've built this NVTC in addition to the staff and Kate, but I just think it's worth reflecting that we have a few minutes. It feels like to get to serve the public and have the vision to see what could be 60 years from now, and we got to do it to the best of our ability. So back to Kate.
Thank you so much. It is so wonderful to have all of our distinguished speakers here this evening. And I'm going to catch up on my little notes here so I make sure I get to the right place. I am absolutely incredibly honored to be able to present our 60th anniversary documentary. And this really is something special. I mentioned it before. This was 100% done by our staff, who are incredibly talented. And so some of us were talking a little bit earlier, well, when did we start thinking that we should be doing something? And I think it might have been a year and a half ago, which is crazy because time really flies. So, when we talked about we had this major milestone, what are we going to do about it, right? And the team came up with some incredible vision for some things that we could do this year. And the first, and I know there's many folks in the room who actually had a chance to participate in it, we actually did our first ever Transit Innovation Summit earlier this year in June. And it was basically sort of a one-day conference for transportation professionals and those who love public transit to really dive into some of the amazing things that are happening here in Northern Virginia. And it really was an incredible amount of energy, kind of getting back to that policy wonk stuff. But I think all of us policy wonks who were there, we found our people. It was wonderful. And so we had something like 160 folks. It was over at the George Mason campus here in Arlington. And it really was quite remarkable, diving into things like, electrification of buses and BRT and even sort of how are we even tackling this world of public transit in this post-COVID world. And so we actually do have the video online on our website, novatransit.org. But anyway, it's actually a fantastic thing. So that really kicked things off, and that was back in June. And here we are tonight with something that was, in fact, this whole evening really was the vision, and I hate just calling out one staff person, but I will. Monique Blyther. She is an incredibly talented filmmaker who joined NVTC just a couple years ago, and she had this vision. And if you get a chance to meet Monique, you'll understand. There's this, sorry, Monique. Anyway, and so this really, the idea of going and interviewing so many former commissioners and really telling the story and documenting in a way that we really had never done before. We found old newsletters. We found a number of different things through archives. We had the benefit a couple years ago of gaining the archives from the first senior planner at NVTC who was involved in developing the Metro Rail. Now, we've actually went through and called those, and we've donated those actually to Metro's archives. But the ability for us to do that now and in time where we can capture folks, and you're actually going to see capturing some folks that aren't with us anymore too, which is sort of special that we were able to do those things. So I think I've said enough. I'm assuming we're all set. I'm going to see a little thumbs up that we're ready to go. But please do hope you enjoy our 60th anniversary documentary.
Northern Virginia's vast and deeply connected transportation network features 32 metro stations, 21 Virginia Railway Express stations, 6 local bus systems serving 6 cities and 6 counties, along with hundreds of bike share stations and 2 major airports, all linking our region to the nation's capital and the world. But it wasn't always this way.
In the 1950s, the major U.S. investment in transportation was in what we now know as the interstate highway system. And a lot of people believed that cars were the future and that they could solve just about every transportation problem, and that transit was maybe had a limited role or completely obsolete, and that what America really needed was lots more highways. And what's interesting about Kennedy, and especially the people he appoints, is they did not agree with this general belief. They saw a greater role for subways and other rapid transit than had previous administrations.
Charlie Fenwick, in the old days, who was a state senator from Arlington County, was beyond the entire world as far as his looking ahead is concerned. He was deeply involved with starting the metro system with Virginia representative with Maryland and D.C. and in Congress. And he envisioned the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. I think there was one of his bills that created that.
That was 1964, the year the Virginia General Assembly established the Northern Virginia Transportation District and Commission, made up of the cities of Alexandria, Falls Church, and Fairfax, and Arlington and Fairfax counties.
He created the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission to represent Northern Virginia, and it's all elected officials. On the idea that we would be responsible and responsive to our local jurisdictions and make sure that they got a fair shake. And NVTC was charged with providing the money or being the funneling for federal money and state money for the metro system and other transportation initiatives.
Washington has often been a laboratory for other cities, and so Johnson and his administration are interested in helping Washington build a rapid transit system that they hope will show the world what can be done in the 1960s with a lot of public investment and a lot of imagination. The first effort to fund Metro, or it wasn't called Metro then, but to fund rapid transit in Washington basically failed in 1963. They just did not have the votes. It was going to come to a vote in December 1963. Obviously, the assassination of President Kennedy made that a terrible time to get anything done. And with plans under Johnson for a national level bill in 1964, people did not think that would be a great year to try to get something specific for the Washington region. So 1965 was the second try, and at that point they were able to get authorization for what was supposed to be a very small system. So this is the famous congressional tactic, the camel's nose under the tent, the one sip of whiskey, where you start with something small and then make it bigger. And once that bill is passed in Congress in 1965, the Maryland and Virginia folks who are interested in a more regional system and more regional government, they get more anxious to get their bills passed in Annapolis and Richmond to set up this compact. So the compact is eventually created in 1967, creating what we now call WMATA, the Washington Metropolitan Area Transit Authority. On the Virginia side, this is the responsibility of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission, which is supposed to represent all the jurisdictions and has plenty of tugging and pulling within that group. And what they're looking for primarily is a way to serve the most number of people at the least cost.
For 60 years, NVTC has fulfilled that promise as a one-of-a-kind institution for regional transit cooperation.
At the time, I used to say that I understood that Metro was supposed to be this technological marvel, but I said, if it's a miracle, it's more a political miracle.
The jurisdictions weren't coordinating with each other. In some respects, they were competing. Other respects, they were duplicating efforts. And there was a clear need for the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. There had to be coordination. There had to be an overall metropolitan regional plan for transportation.
NVTC's first task was to help Virginia turn the dream of a regional rapid transit system into reality.
The first thing we did was the Shirley Highway bus. I was chairman of NVTC when we did that. In those days, we got 90% federal money to do this. 90% federal money. Bought the buses, and the 10% the local match was very little. Contracted with AB&W and ran the buses, and still is one of the most successful HOV bus operations in the United States.
The Shirley Highway Express Bus on Freeway project ran from 1971 to 1974 and was the first separated bus rapid transit route on an interstate highway during peak morning commute hours.
So many people live in Virginia, work in Maryland, and vice versa. During commuting period, those hours in the morning and the afternoon, it was just clogged. Employers were finding their employees were dissatisfied with the amount of time they had to spend commuting. So you had to have a body, the NVTC, that one coordinated, but secondly had an emphasis upon transit, upon the future.
Given the congestion and the imperative of creating alternatives for commuters besides the automobile. We also had air congestion, air quality issues, largely driven by the automobile that we wanted to address. But also there's the principle of being the biggest jurisdiction in the region and in the state. I felt it incumbent upon me as a member of the Fairfax Board to promote regional cooperation. You've got to work well with others to get to a place where you can have a plan that everybody buys into and that everybody can benefit from. I think NVTC quietly served as both a sounding board for new ideas, but also as a strong resource for developing alternative modes of transportation and being aggressive in identifying funding sources.
The focus was on the Metro rail system, of course, and all of the issues of financing and how the system should be built out in the three jurisdictions, Maryland, Virginia, and DC, which is quite a unique situation for transit systems, and the governance that is involved then gets much more complicated.
So there was residential opposition in DC, in Maryland, in Virginia, pretty much anywhere that Metro was planned. And a lot of that had to do with the traffic that stations would bring. That, again, is a valid concern, even if it's not necessarily one that we want to have overwhelm the others.
Well, the agreement was that a piece of the extension, both in the district and in Maryland, would be agreed to, but neither would be completed. And the Virginia extension, which was mostly yellow line at that point, was also not guaranteed. So everybody had risk, but exactly who had how much risk and when was really the fight, and it was a fight.
The Metro was originally supposed to go down the median strip of I-66 all the way through Arlington and serve as a commuter route for people from Fairfax. That was just what people were thinking about. You know, how do you get all those people in Fairfax to DC? Well, you just run this line straight down the 66 into the district.
The first metro stations opened in the District of Columbia in 1976, reaching Arlington a year later, with stations in Alexandria and Fairfax County opening in 1983.
Well, when the Orange Line opened and I participated in the opening at East Falls Church, I did something about having orange shoelaces because I think we walked over to the station to the opening. I was, of course, younger and fitter and more flexible in those days, but it was, as far as I was concerned, it was a big deal.
The 90s particularly, but that whole time I was doing this, is really what I call the golden age of transit transformation in Northern Virginia particularly, and the region in general, because of things like opening VRE. We opened VRE in that time frame. We finished Metro. The original plan, the 103 miles, was finished. And that led us to a whole new bunch of things to do, to implement, a lot of them through NVTC.
A lot of time, was devoted to Metro, and then VRE was in its infancy, and so it was a germ of an idea when I first got on that board.
NVTC had discussed the potential of commuter rail service in Northern Virginia as early as 1964, but those efforts faced opposition from the freight railroads, whose tracks offered ready access to prime office locations.
It was a wild ride. Mafursa was a Brazilian company that was manufacturing the trains, and they were taking their good old time, at least from our perspective. We, of course, were all elected officials, and everybody was sweating it because the newspapers were all over us, especially the Journal, and they were kind of naysayers. They were, doubtful that we would be able to pull this off. And at the time, I was chairman of the VRE Operations Board, even though we had nothing to operate, but we were getting it ready. And so actually, a visit from us, to the factory would get their attention.
By the summer of 1992, VRE was ready to start rolling on the Fredericksburg and Manassas lines, concluding a long and sometimes frustrating process.
Everything that could go wrong would go wrong. And so, when we started, Amtrak went on strike. It was like the day before the VRE was supposed to start its inaugural service. And it was exciting. Everybody was, out at the station. There were green balloons and banners and elected officials and people in the community. And Tom Bashadny, who was our director for transportation at the time, he was a staff person for transportation in Fairfax County, and Tom tells the story of looking down the tracks and wondering, will anything show up? Because Amtrak was operating our VRE service. So there was a partnership between Amtrak and VRE, and Amtrak had gone on strike. And I don't know how it all got worked out, but sure enough, our train came down the track, and it was a big deal. And to this day, when I see a VRE train coming down the tracks, I choke up. It was like my child.
So that was the focus. And then as the metro rail system was building out, then the need for buses that would serve those rail stations came to the fore. And so there was a great emphasis on coordinating bus service, and NVTC was involved there.
The 6 bus systems that serve NVTC's district, as well as OmniRide, provide over 600,000 rides each week, with NVTC working hand in hand with all of the bus operators to foster innovation and regional collaboration in their operations.
Once these bus systems started going, then we had buses going at counterproductive places. And so NVTC sort of led the charge to get us to sit down and think about how all of our individual bus lines, like Dash and Art, and I can't even remember all the names, and the Fairfax Connector, which we already had, worked together as well as worked with Metro.
Q started as a partnership between the city of Fairfax and George Mason University in 1980. Alexandria's Dash started operations in 1985. Fairfax Connector began operations the following year, and Loudoun County took over responsibility for commuter bus operations in 1994, while ART began service in 1998. Throughout the establishment and growth of the local bus systems, NVTC fostered regional cooperation through times of crisis, coordinating emergency evacuation bus routes following 9/11, to times of opportunity in establishing the Smart Trip Fare Payment Network, to advances in zero-emission bus technologies.
When I started was right when the bus system was being restructured, basically to save Metrobus and work out a regional system where you could have the local services that were emerging in a lot of jurisdictions kind of blend with and become complementary to, rather than conflicting with the regional Metrobus system. So that was kind of the, on the bus side, what was happening. On the rail side, we were nearing the completion of the 103-mile system.
The completion of the 103-mile system wasn't the end of the line for Metro. A new station on the Red Line at Nome Gallaudet in the district opened in 2004, quickly followed by a Blue Line extension in Maryland. But far more ambitious plans were being laid in Virginia, building on NVTC's efforts to bring rail to Dulles International Airport.
When I first ran for a local government office, I made reviving rail to Dulles my top priority. And at the time, it seemed like a fool's errand. People had tried and just failed. And I was counseled, that's a losing enterprise. You're going to embarrass yourself. You won't be able to keep that commitment. And I was bound and determined to revive it. But from my point of view, not having transit in the single biggest and most important economic corridor in the region, namely the Dulles corridor, would be self-defeating for everybody in Northern Virginia and would, frankly, compromise the promise of that corridor. So it had to be connected to the core metro system. When we started building the Silver Line, only 17,000 people lived in Tysons. 150,000 people commuted into Tysons to work at precisely the same time every morning and went home at precisely the same time every night. And we were puzzled about congestion. So building a place that's 24/7 with a grid of streets that's environmentally cutting edge too, and that has 100,000 people living in it, is going to transform quality of life in Tysons. And it will no longer be sort of a 9-to-5 place.
Throughout NVTC's 60 years, the organization persevered through challenges and external threats, sometimes coming from those not understanding NVTC's important role in the region.
Over the course of the years, several times there were proposals made and efforts made to do something with NVTC, to merge it with other agencies, to do away with it altogether, to alter its membership, to change the way that the region is represented through NVTC at the Metro Board itself. There were changes made legislatively and administratively at the state level about how NVTC received its money, for example.
We have a soup mixture of acronyms and transportation organizations, and if you don't follow them and you don't understand their specific niche and their specific purpose, it's easy to say, well, why don't you just have one and let them do it all? And we would have multiple times where Richmond became, then the General Assembly or the governor, became a significant factor in this organization, NVTC, being able to accomplish its mission and do its work. So I remember going to testify in different hearings and trying to explain the difference between NVTA and NVTC.
They kept trying to say you don't need NVTC and NVTA, and we had some Republican legislators who were on the commission at the time who just felt there was redundancy. And honestly, there were all the issues around VRE ownership and having to redo all of the underlying legal situations that I think in the end that proved to be our trump card of why it shouldn't happen. The cost associated with it would have just been outrageous.
30 years after NVTC used federal money to help promote the launch of the Washington Flyer ground transportation services to Dulles International Airport, Phase 1 of the Silver Line opened in 2014, with 5 new stations running to Tysons and terminating at Wheelie-Reston East.
We were able to do Phase 1 in fairly expeditious time, but Phase 2 took a lot of persuasion and a lot of work and rolling up your sleeves and trying to talk to people. And that delayed, that's one of the contributing factors to the delay of Phase 2 on the Silver Line, which we finally opened. I step back and I think about this, all that we went through to get it, because after we finally got the tax district, then we had to deal with the Bush administration that didn't like transit. And they were looking for any reason to kill the project.
Building the Silver Line to Dulles and beyond meant adding a new jurisdiction to the Metro Compact, as well as adding a new jurisdiction to NVTC, the first since Metro was originally envisioned.
I was reminded of the fact that whenever I would leave the NVTC meetings, usually Kathy Hudgens, who was the other representative from Fairfax and was on the board and was one of my colleagues, she and I would always take the Metro back to Reston after our NVTC meetings. But we were the two who actually went out to Loudoun County to meet with the Board of Supervisors out there to impress upon them the importance of Loudoun being supportive of extending the Silver Line to Loudoun and what the economic development opportunities would be for them, as well as just providing transportation for their residents. And I remember to this day how it was not an easy thing to do, to be honest with you. We had to switch a few votes out there, but we were able to get that done.
When I first came in office in 2012, I was one of 7 new supervisors, and we were immediately confronted with a discussion that really had been going on for decades, which was whether to be part of the extension of the Silver Line. And all of the region's planning really had been centered around the Silver Line going up the median of the Dulles Toll Road and into Loudoun County, serving Dulles Airport and beyond. But our board at that time, just 6 months into office, had to make the decision whether to commit Loudoun County formally to that project. And it was a 5-4 vote. It was a very close vote. I'm the only supervisor actually left that cast that vote in either way, but fortunately on the prevailing side. And so, once we became part of the Silver Line project, I think it really formally connected us to the rest of the region when it came to transit and when it came to providing those kind of transportation options.
When Metro was extended to Loudoun, there would be a need for Loudoun to be paying, and so they would have access to the 2% gas tax at the time for NVTC if they were to join, and that would provide a funding source for Loudoun. But PRTC, the commission to the south of us, was also very interested in having Loudoun County join, and so there was sort of a courtship that went on.
I think the story of Loudoun's involvement in NVTC kind of mirrors our engagement in the region. Loudoun County, kind of considered on the outskirts of the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, saw a lot of population growth, tremendous amount of population growth, and with that comes new options for transit. And new needs and new demands from commuters. And so from the time that Loudoun County started our Loudoun County transit system until today, where we're part of the Silver Line, the Metro Silver Line, we've really become more and more engaged in the region, not just on the transit side, but as a job center, a population center, and I think one of the major places that people go in our region to recreate.
Phase 2 opened in 2022, bringing a 6-decade dream of connecting Dulles by rail to life. While the public often focused on construction and expansion of the Metro rail system, another issue has dogged Metro from its earliest days: the lack of a dedicated, sustainable funding source.
Dedicated funding for Metro has been a long time objective, and I think the reason that it's so complicated is because there's 3 states involved.
The challenge was to get transit money not as an afterthought in funding at both the state and federal level, but built into funding programs. But by the end of this period, it began to dawn on us pretty seriously that we didn't have a guaranteed revenue source for Metro. And that may sound familiar because now we've realized again, 20 years later, that we still don't have a guaranteed funding source for Metro.
I remember attending a meeting of the Washington Board of Trade at the Chamber of Commerce offices in downtown DC with representatives. They were CEOs from all the major corporations in the Washington area, especially from Virginia. And it was actually called by Chuck Bean at the Council of Governments, but it dovetailed perfectly with what NVTC was doing as well. And we had a very candid and frank discussion about strategies for getting the Virginia General Assembly to fund the Virginia's component of the capital investment. Northern Virginia is 40% of the state's GDP. And although many jurisdictions in Southern Virginia have no direct benefit of the system here, the fact that 25 cents of every dollar that we send to Richmond comes back to us, it's clearly in their self-interest to ensure that the economic health of the Northern Virginia region continues.
Yeah, I think the importance of NVTC to Metro funding is the level of expertise they bring to the table for Northern Virginia and how well they've represented us down in Richmond. I think the establishment of the WMATA committee here at NVTC has been a real shift in how we view and talk about Metro as a group, as a region, and I think that's been really, really important.
I think one of the big game changers for NVTC was when the state decided to do 66 inside the Beltway and to direct some of the toll revenue here.
There was a recognition that we needed to, particularly with I-66, approach it from a multimodal standpoint. And while there was a lot of pressure and interest in some of the citizens outside of the Beltway and being able to expand the highway capacity, we also knew that we had to expand transit access as well. So the thing that's so innovative about the commuter choice program on 66, which we were then able to also take to 395, was it was really the first time that we were able to take revenues that were generated by drivers and users of the corridor in their vehicles and being able to take that approach and say, okay, all the transportation improvements in this corridor are eligible for that too. And we also wanted to make sure that it wasn't the state making those decisions. So I'm really proud of those programs. I think that it's been not just a great improvement for transportation in Northern Virginia. I've started to see a lot of other states that are replicating that same approach. Colorado, Washington State even, they've recently announced some programs where they're looking at things on a much more corridor-wide basis and investing in multimodal improvements so that they're really focusing on person throughput through the whole corridor.
To date, NVTC has funded new bus routes, bike share, bus stop improvements, offered reduced transit fares, and helped build park and ride lots with investments totaling more than $178 million. As the network of public transit in Northern Virginia continued to grow and flourish, businesses took note of what transit meant for their economic development. In 2017, Amazon announced it intended to build a second headquarters and solicited proposals from cities across North America. A year later, the company announced it would create HQ2 in the Crystal City neighborhood of Arlington, which later took on rebranding as National Landing.
And they started out with a list of about 214, I believe it was, possible sites. So there was a lot of competition around the country on who's going to get the Amazon headquarters. That would be a huge economic development win for whoever got it. At one point, as we were trying to get people to decide, hey, how do we pay for these capital projects? Amazon says, okay, we're going to whittle this list down to 20 places. And as it turns out, one in the District of Columbia, one in Maryland, one in Virginia. So all of a sudden, the light bulb went off, and our legislative leaders realized, hey, wait a minute, if we work together, we have an opportunity to win this major project.
The real thing that we're trying to get at is kind of creating a tech corridor, right? With having Virginia Tech coming in and building their campus, with having Amazon a mile or two away, we're really trying to bring a lot of future jobs here.
The region's existing and planned transit network is credited with helping to seal the deal to move to Arlington. While the region's public transit agencies have faced a variety of challenges over the decades, none were quite like the rapid changes brought about by the start of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020.
The pandemic was a hard time for transportation, and for bus service, for Amtrak, and it was real hard on VRE. People didn't want to, get into a vehicle and expose themselves. Buildings in Tyson's, were empty. People didn't want to go into work. They were working from home, which is a good thing. It's sort of transformational, but it's changed the way people work.
The memory that I look back on is looking at our ridership numbers for WMATA about Q1 of 2020 and thinking, we have finally turned a corner, right? Metro had really struggled during a number of years with recovering ridership after major incident with a loss of life, needed track work, service disruptions. And finally, after those years of Safe Track, the significant investment in the system, an investment, by the way, that we all fought tooth and nail for in 2018, right, when we got that dedicated funding agreement, we were finally starting to see ridership come back. And then, of course, the world cratered, right? Public transit became a real focus of attention for people worried about the spread of the virus, especially in our more urban areas.
This focus on regionalism is increasingly important. Post-COVID, it makes it even more important because there's a lot of people working from home now. They are, doing things different in the way of travel patterns than they've done before. They're needing transit and transportation options at different times of the day that maybe aren't as conventional as the way we used to think. And so having all of our jurisdictions at the table talking together about what we're experiencing in our own backyards helps us be able to plan a more robust network of services for the people that we serve.
Work is underway to tackle the next major projects, like expanding passenger rail through major investments in rail and track to benefit VRE, as well as to improve bus service with bus rapid transit routes that cross communities. Work that started with discussions at NVTC and work that NVTC continues to have a strong hand in completing.
Another initiative that was going along at the same time was Long Bridge. And every meeting we would get an update on Long Bridge.
So for transforming rail in Virginia, it really refers to a statewide program that we had to expand passenger rail across the entire state. The long-term goal here is to separate freight and passenger so we can have a fully separated network.
Construction on the new Long Bridge is expected to be completed in 2030, with other work to expand rail capacity in Virginia either underway or in the planning stages. The future also looks different for buses, high-quality, high-performing routes known as bus rapid transit.
I've largely been a fan of BRT, my entire career, and I think it's, a sleeping giant in terms of what it can do. And there's been so much focus on rail, legitimately and for good reason. But if you look at what happened during the pandemic with bus ridership versus rail ridership, I think we have to understand that bus riders rely on bus transportation in ways that maybe even rail riders don't. And so I think there's a couple things here. One, from an equity standpoint, we can move our buses into communities that otherwise wouldn't have transportation much quicker, much more efficiently, and much more economically. The second thing is the flexibility of BRT compared to fixed rail is something that I think we need to pay a lot of attention to.
What's exciting about BRT is that the best scenario, right, is you've got this dedicated lane, you don't have to deal with traffic, and you can go more quickly on the BRT than you can if you were to get in your car. That's not always possible, and so what is exciting about the BRT is that where that is feasible and possible, we will be doing that.
NVTC has been deeply involved in planning for Envision Route 7, a bus rapid transit system connecting Tysons to Alexandria by way of Falls Church and Seven Corners. The Route 7 corridor is one of the most economically diverse in Northern Virginia and home to one of the most used bus routes in the region, making it a prime candidate for enhanced bus service.
It is a classic example of when I speak about the need to provide transit options for more and more people that are 1, convenient, 2, affordable, 3, safe, and 4, reliable. That sums up the objectives of Route 7 BRT.
You know, thanks to NVTC, working with Alexandria Dash, we were able to, re-envision kind of what the bus system looks like here in Alexandria, and it was huge, right? We went from covering 20 or 30% of minorities, low income, and seniors to covering up in the 70 and 80 percentile of low income, people of color, seniors, disabled. So it was a dramatic shift in the coverage that we're doing.
I think that's what's so exciting is seeing kind of that movement forward and thinking about, even in my short time, 3 decades here of, Merrifield used to be just an old cinema, and before that it was a drive-in movie theater. Now Mosaic is looked at as the model for the way we want to do transit-oriented development, mixed-use development, and so many people looking at the ability to get somewhere but then get out of your car.
From NVTC's founding to today, we've seen the development of a thriving transit network serving more than 2 million people in Northern Virginia through metro rail, commuter rail, and bus systems, giving more people more options to get where they're going.
With Northern Virginia's population projected to grow 11% from 2020 to 2030, expanding public transit can help limit additional traffic congestion on our roads and highways. That comes in the form of evening and weekend service on VRE, more express buses on I-66 and I-395, I-95, more environmentally friendly buses in all of our communities, a network of bus rapid transit systems serving the busiest corridors in our region and connecting with each other, and Metro, allowing for easy transfers.
NVTC is the epitome of good regional coordination. When we sit in that meeting, we can have the largest jurisdictions not only in Northern Virginia, but frankly in all of Virginia, and some of the smallest, all working together on an equal footing. And that's very, very important for the credibility of the organization and something that's in our DNA.
I see NVTC continuing to grow as an organization. Sure, perhaps in the number of staff, but really in our expertise. Beyond our solid financial management, our staff make it possible for us to understand how travel patterns are changing, what impact or benefits our systems are providing for the community and the environment, and how our systems can better serve the public. And yes, we are 100% focused on telling the story of why the Northern Virginia Transit Network, including Metro and VRE, needs to be fully funded and successful to serve our communities.
I'm proud to serve as NVTC's chair in its 60th year, and I know our regional successes wouldn't have been possible without the hard work of my predecessors and the 60 years of staff leadership at NVTC. As we look to the future, both the opportunities and challenges that will present themselves, I know that NVTC is and will continue to be the heart of public transit in Northern Virginia.
come on up here. I know. So well done. It's all the stories. So thank you to each of you to putting this together. Specifically, Monique has been called out earlier by Kate. Please give her a hand. And I'm pretty sure that Matt Friedman was sort of the voice of God throughout all of that, so please give him a hand. Most of you who sat for parts of who sort of gave snippets of video, but everybody in this room knows how much work it is to put something like that together. So also want to credit Coley Tuzel, Tenley O'Hara, Rhonda Gilchrist, Transit Fellows Robert Rudsill, and Nathan Varnell, who couldn't join us tonight. Please give them one more big round of applause. So we're going to wrap up quickly because the real stars, there's a toast, and it's going to be given by two folks who have given a ton of service and leadership. So I'll just say we're celebrating the past, but I like that the video also included a focus on our future, which is not inevitable, and we can help mold together. So we have promise for transit technology, sustainability, regional connectivity, and we use the NVTC is at the heart of a lot of these innovations and the heart of the work we need to do. So 60 years, we haven't been the only one in the spotlight, but we have made a big difference. So now I'll pass it back. It's an amazing point in our history. We have an outstanding team of staff, and you guys don't have to stay up here forever. You're welcome. We're going to now pass it to Kate Mattice. First, a picture. Give them a hand so they smile. And then we're very lucky to have Kate as our leader. Everybody in the room knows this. Please give her one more hand.
Thank you so much. And so here we are. We're just about to wrap up our celebrations. A couple of small last important items. Again, I want to thank, as I've done, I will continue to do all the commission staff for their efforts every day, but in particular putting together the Innovation Summit as well as this evening's event. I have already called out Monique, and we've got the rest of the staff to help with the documentary. I do want to do a call out for Genevieve Cottrell, who's right up in the front. She's my executive assistant and keeps everything going. And so thank you, Genevieve, so much for this. We also want to thank the team from Commonwealth Consultants. They helped us with the event planning. They provided the staff this evening, and they've been fantastic to help us with this event planning. And of course, all our former and current commissioners. And so before you head anywhere, I know you're really close, almost ready to let you out. All of the current and former commissioners, we would love for you to come up here to do a photo. And those who are not can go ahead and go out and grab some champagne or sparkling juice. We will be doing a toast momentarily, so do not go anywhere. If you are anxious to leave, which we don't want you to do, but if you are, there's a wonderful little box gift as you go out, so be sure to take that. So again, thank you, everybody. We do have a wonderful toast planned by our two longest-serving commissioners, Ms. Sharon Bulova and Mr. Dave Snyder. So I do hope that you hang out for a moment. And so we'll be doing that just out in the atrium just after the photo. So thank you very much.
So Dave and I flipped a coin to talk about who would go first, who would go second. And I swear that I did not coordinate with Tim Kaine on my remarks because he sort of said a lot of what I wanted to say today, because that's what NVTC has done and does, is passing the torch from one to another, and continuity is what is important. It's an organization that is really required in order to make sure that the continuity is there to follow through on that vision throughout the years and throughout the decades that it takes to get something big done. Metro, VRE, all of those other things. So with that, my toast is to continuity, and thank you to the staff and the commissioners of NVTC who have made that happen. So, to continuity.
Thank you, Sharon, and thank you for everyone here who's made NVTC what it is today, but more importantly, what NVTC will be in the future. So here's my toast. Here's to the people we work for, the taxpayers, the riders, and the voters. Here's to the people we work with. That's all of our staffs, elected officials, planners, but perhaps even more importantly, the people who drive our vehicles and who maintain our facilities and our stations. But finally, here's to an even better future, where our region will, in the short term, rather than long term, address all of our funding issues, especially Metro. The future where we serve even more people and give more people across even larger geographic areas options that some of us have had the blessing to have for many years. And finally, here's to a future where we carry out our goals of supporting our entire region and of advancing equity, our economy, and our environment. And finally, here's to us and here's to the future.
Cheers.